Okay, everybody, we are going to move into chapter 10. We just finished a chapter about the pilgrims and the reasons, the religious reasons, and the family reasons that they moved to the colonies and how they were a bit unlike the other colonists. We also learned about how they sailed on the Mayflower and how that was a very hard journey because that was a cargo ship that was not intended for people, it was intended to carry goods. So, the vocab that we are going to learn in this chapter. The common house is the first one. A common house is a phrase to describe a building used for meetings and worship. So, worship means where people would go to pray or where people would go to have a town meeting. That would be a common house. So, for example, the pilgrims gathered in the town common house for Sunday prayers. Also, going to be hearing a harvest. A harvest is the crops collected at the end of a growing season. So the crops that would have to be saved to get them through the winter would be the harvest. For example, the harvest provided enough food for the colonists to survive the winter. Big question. Why was it important for the pilgrims to work hard to prepare for winter? That is the big question we're going to be answering in our writing notebooks. And we may not get through the entire chapter today, but you will have a question that you're going to answer in your writer's notebook. So let's move into the chapter. And follow along with me. Okay, so this is chapter 10, the Pilgrim Colony. The Pilgrims had hoped to settle in Virginia, but the captain of the Mayflower had refused to go farther than Cape Cod. The cold, snowy winter had already begun. The Pilgrims spent most of the first winter in Plymouth Colony aboard the crowded, damp Mayflower. The men and boys went ashore to build the first houses. An icy wind blew off the ocean. On many days, the weather was so bad that the men could not work. During that first winter, half the Pilgrims died from cold and hunger. All winter, the Native Americans who lived near Plymouth stayed in the forest and watched the Pilgrims. They watched the Pilgrims bring supplies from the ship. They watched them chop down trees and saw logs into planks to build houses. Here's an image of, despite the cold, wintry conditions, the men and boys set to build the homes. Setting up a colony. The first house the Pilgrims built was called the Common House. At first, it was a shelter and a place to store tools. Later, it was used for a place of worship, or we said worship was like a place for church, a place for prayer. When spring finally came, the Pilgrims moved off the Mayflower and into the houses. They began to plant crops. They had to work hard. Once the Mayflower sailed back to England, they were on their own. During the warm summer, the Pilgrims tended to their gardens. They were already preparing for the winter ahead. A visitor. One day, a tall Native American warrior with long black hair appeared at the edge of the woods. He walked boldly into Plymouth. The Pilgrims came out of their houses and in front of the fields to see the visitor. "Welcome, Englishmen," he said. "My name is Samoset." The Pilgrims were astonished that he spoke English. It turned out Samoset had learned the Pilgrims' language from the England fishermen who dried their nets and packed their fish along the shore. Samoset spoke to John Carver, the first governor of Plymouth. He told the governor that the chief of the Wamapogue was coming to visit the Pilgrims. The Wamapogue lived nearby. Samoset told the Pilgrims about the Native American who used to live in a place where the Pilgrims had built their village. These Native Americans had cleared the fields around Plymouth. A few years before, Samoset told the Pilgrims a strange sickness had killed every member of that nation. The only person left in that nation was Squanto, a warrior. Squanto had been taken to England by a fisherman before the strange sickness broke out. When Squanto returned, he was the only one of his people still alive. Okay, so we're going to pause here and have a group discussion. Why was Squanto the only person to survive the sickness? They said that there was a sickness that had broken out in that village or that area that the Pilgrims were planning to grow their harvest and live. Now, the entire tribe that lived there before had died out. The only living person is Squanto. Why did he survive? Take a second to talk and then unpause the video. So we can see in this chapter that Squanto survived the harsh winter because he was taken to England by a fisherman before the strange sickness broke out. So that is an interesting statement in this chapter. Squanto was taken to England by a fisherman before the strange sickness broke out that killed out every member of that nation or that tribe. So the last thing we're going to do is we're going to make a prediction. We're going to write in our writer's notebook a prediction about why was Squanto taken to England? Why would a fisherman take him back to England? And then when he returns, he finds the rest of his tribe has died out. We're going to take a second to write that prediction. Okay, so this is going to be your sentence starter. I predict that Squanto was taken to England because. Take a few minutes to write this prediction. Then you are going to take a moment to share with your class. And on Monday, we are going to discuss why he was taken to England and what happens at the first Thanksgiving with Squanto, the Pilgrims, and the Native Americans.